A lot of people say to me that homelessness has been around forever, so it's not like we can do anything about it. The reality is that that's not the case. Homelessness, in definition, used to mean the lack of tie to a family group. It didn't actually mean being without shelter. It was really in the 1980s, at least in Canada and other countries of a similar nature, that homelessness started to literally mean houselessness as well. Homelessness itself, in its most basic definition, would be someone who lacks access to safe, secure, healthy, and affordable housing. The estimations are between 300,000 and 1 million people in Canada will experience homelessness within a given year.
On Wednesday night, I was breeding snakes, boa constrictors and pythons, and someone tipped off animal control on how big my snakes were over the bylaw limit of 9 feet. And then Thursday night, animal control came and I lost my place, I lost all my reptiles, and I ended up here last night. The first 2 nights I became homeless after losing my place, I spent it in a motel, and because I didn't want to go to a shelter at all. But once I ran out of money, I had no choice. And I think myself is because, I didn't want to be associated with, drugs and alcohols and what all the street stuff involved. Like, I just want to get back in my own place and relax, be able to kick up on the couch and cook my own meals and sleep in my own bed. And here is, we sleep with other people, and we're out during the daytime, so whether it's cold or not, you have to go out. I have tattoos on my face. Though I am trying to remove them, I've been having a lot of troubles of, finding new places. Like, I had my place for a year because my friend knew the landlord, so he vouched for me. But a lot of times, I get turned away from places just because of how I look.
There's roughly 2,000 shelter beds within about an 8-block radius of Ryerson University. And there are roughly 3,800 shelter beds in the city.
Technically speaking, if you go into a shelter and just tell them that you need a bed for the evening because you've got nowhere to sleep, then they're not going to ask you any questions. They'll just take you in. If you have an ID, that's better. If you don't have any ID, then they'll still take you in. We'll still take you in. And then if you don't have IDs, we help you get IDs from the government. A lot of homeless people lose their IDs. So we have services which provide help for them to secure IDs again. And while they're in the shelter system, we help them, we do reporting so that they get allowance every week. Every Thursday, they get a certain allowance from the city.
Michael Shapcott in the Wellesley Institute explained it in terms of homelessness is like an iceberg. The reality is that we only see roughly 10% of an iceberg. The other 90% is below the water. It's the exact same thing with homelessness. We only see roughly 10% of it. And the rest of it is hidden, but it still exists. The types of homelessness include people who sleep rough, which would be an estimation between 5 to 10% of the entire homeless population, would be the population that would be the most visible. So people who are literally sleeping in the street or in bushes or in their cars and so forth, people who are not deemed as properly sheltered. And then there would be those who are in sheltered situations designed for emergencies. From there, it would be people who are hidden. The population of hidden homeless would include people who are couch surfing or people who are living in a single family unit but two families are living there, for example. And then there's a population at risk, and at risk is defined by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation as someone who spends more than 30% of their income on housing, and then severely at risk would be more than 50% of your income on housing. And then there's the housed population.
There's a lot of reasons for being homeless, but one of the top reasons why they're homeless is extreme poverty, unemployment, underemployment, and mental illness and addictions. These are the top 4 reasons. Many people are homeless because they could not afford a place. Many of them are actually unemployed. A big percentage, I would say, upwards of 95% of our clients are unemployed.
Causes of homelessness could be almost anything, really quite truly. Most often we know that it's poverty, it's violence, it's unsafe situations in a home, so forth and so on. But it could literally be almost anything. But the primary cause is poverty. How somebody gets there or not, it would be different for every single person. If you think of a hobo, you'll come up with a stereotypical image of a middle-aged older man with a beard who is looking fairly rough and ragged clothing and so forth and so on. And the reality is, when it comes to people experiencing homelessness, you can take a look around yourself and it's the exact same people. It could look like any single person. I mean, your best friend might be experiencing homelessness, family members, so forth and so on. You will never know by the look of someone. So I often hear people saying things like, oh, so-and-so looks homeless. The reality is that there's, to look homeless looks like any other person in society.
I've been living in the shelter system for about 8 months now. Well, I'm homeless because my family is all over the country, mainly the East Coast, which is Nova Scotia. So there's no work in Nova Scotia, so I had to come here to Toronto to find work, and now I'm a saute cook at Jack Astor's on Front Street, and I'm saving as much money as I can before I get out of here. Not all homeless people look as they appear. Like, you could see somebody that looks like they have money and everything, but they are in a shelter. You just can't judge everybody. And not everybody there is on drugs or everything. Some of us are just there because it's somewhere to stay.
I'm a seasonal employee. I'm a roofer. Do roofing in the summertime. And I'm only in this situation because my house got robbed and my rent got robbed for the month of March, and I didn't qualify for, I couldn't pay my rent, so I'm out in the street. So I've got to wait till the end of the month, so then I'm back in business again. I got housing again.
If you take a moment and just think of all the different names you've heard, even us as ordinary people that we've heard replied to people experiencing homelessness, you'd come up with some of the worst insults you could think of. The absolute worst insults. Druggie, pusher, dangerous, pedophile.
Lazy, uneducated, loser, drug addict, drug pusher, mentally ill.
The myths are vast. One thing that I think is really critical in thinking about myths is this question around violence. There's a general conception that homeless people are violent. And certainly, some people experiencing homelessness are violent, just like some students are violent, some instructors are violent, But what I can tell you is that people experiencing homelessness are more likely to be the targets of violence than to inflict violence themselves. There is a study released in the United States called America's Growing Tide of Violence, and it looked at hate crimes directed at those people experiencing homelessness. And the reality is that hate crimes outnumbered all other hate crimes recorded in the United States, directed at people experiencing homelessness. It is an absolute critical stage. We have devalued and dehumanized people experiencing homelessness to such a degree that people are targeting them as vulnerable populations. Another reality, or myth, shall we say, with homelessness is this concept that people experiencing homelessness are a drain on the system. The reality is the system is draining itself in that the most effective and cost-efficient, let alone the most humane response to homelessness is, first of all, making sure people have a home. And then if there's needed support in terms of health or mental health or addiction or whatever else might come up, that also needs to be in place. But we know that the cost of homelessness, or put it more appropriately, the cost of our inadequate response to homelessness costs way more than it does to actually support someone through an affordable home, which is cheaper than the shelter system. Shelter system will cost about $78 a night. To put somebody into affordable housing will cost something like $25 or less. It's cheaper to actually house people. And people are supported, and it's the most humane response, and it's also the most cost-effective, right? It's hard, it's expensive to maintain crisis. It's cheaper to end it. The problem is that the emergency shelters have been functioning as long-term housing for a number of people. I mean, there's over 80,000 people waiting on the housing list in Toronto, and it's 12 years or more to essentially receive housing.
Every morning they're awakened at 7 o'clock in the morning. They have to leave because when they leave, then the cleaners clean all the beds and all the toilets and all the public places. The beddings are changed every day with fresh linens, fresh pillowcases, and if possible, fresh pillows, and also fresh blankets. The floors are clean, and they're washed and cleaned. They're disinfected every day. The toilets and the washrooms are disinfected and washed every day. The new towels are also provided every day for those who come in.
Homelessness itself causes mental health issues. You can't go through the experience of the entire society rejecting you, of inadequate nutrition, inadequate housing, inadequate health response without developing stress, anxiety, and where does that go from there? Well, it affects your health and your mental health. Homelessness causes health problems.
In our particular case, the meals are prepared by a kitchen staff. We contract it out because it's a lot of work for us. So what happens is we contract it out to a contractor who provides the services, and they make meal plannings. They provide the meals. They create the menus. Actually, the menu is prepared for the whole month, and they try as much as possible to balance the meals with fiber, with protein, with fruits and vegetables. We notice when individuals are sick and we tell them, you're not feeling well, we know that you're on medication, you need to go to a doctor. They wouldn't go. So what we do is we give them the tokens and tell them, you go to your doctor. They wouldn't go. What our counselors do sometimes is they take the time out and actually bring them from the shelter to the doctor, to the hospital. They would not go. So what developed, one of the services provided by the city or some agencies is the health bus, for example. A health bus comes once a week and parks in front of the shelter, and there they can actually access the healthcare system, right? They can talk to a nurse, they can talk to doctors who check them up and see how they are. But interestingly, here's one thing that you'll see. It's right at the doorstep of the shelter, and yet some people who are sick, they do not have the motivation to leave the shelter, take a few steps out of the building, go up in the bus. That's really sad.
If we understand homelessness as a result of somebody's personal failure, then the solution is up to the individual. If we understand homelessness as a structural problem, one in which we've facilitated through lack of programs and supports and so forth and so on, then we have to respond appropriately. It's in our collective interest to respond appropriately. The situation as it exists now is that there is a fairly prevalent understanding of homelessness as a result of someone's personal failure. And if we think that way, then we will not solve homelessness, because we will continually push it back to that individual and say it's their fault as opposed to a structural problem. But the reality is, when so many people experience homelessness in Canada on a year-over-year basis, we can't say this is just a variety of people's personal failings. This is a structural problem. And even if it is a personal failing, think about ourselves and our own lives. Have you made mistakes? I know I have. And I've had people in my life there at the right times to be able to, guide me in the right direction, as we do for each other, as we should in our personal lives. Why can't we do that on a structural level? So solutions really, in terms of what's stopping us from moving forward, is we need to shift our thinking. In a country such as Canada, we have the capacity to certainly change this scenario for so many people.
You and I will not survive in the streets if we have become homeless right now. These individuals are survivors in the highest order.